What's up, guys? Welcome back to Everyday Money. Oftentimes when you go to take a mortgage loan, people will try to talk you into getting a 20, a 15, or maybe even a 10-year loan versus the traditional 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Their reasoning for this is usually that it is much cheaper, it costs less in interest, and your home is paid off much sooner than it would be with the 30-year mortgage. Now, while that is all true, if you do just straight up pay the note, payment by payment to the end of the term, a 20, 15, or 10-year mortgage is quite a bit cheaper than a 30-year mortgage. However, if you just take the difference between those mortgages and invest that amount into our typical 10% annual return index fund or some sort of investment that returns approximately 10% as the market typically does, you will find that you will have lost out on hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment returns by going with that shorter term mortgage. In addition, that shorter term mortgage will be riskier in the end than your 30-year mortgage, and I'm going to show you why today. So like I said, a lot of times people will want you to take these mortgages, these lower, shorter term mortgages, the Dave Ramseys of the world, the people that say that all debt is bad, etc., etc. And so we're just going to compare the average $200,000 home using average rates, pretty much average everything, so that this works essentially nationwide. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start with the 30-year fixed rate mortgage at 3%. That ends up being a payment of $843 a month for $300,000 approximately total payments with interest, and a $100,000 of interest only. And again, a lot of folks will cringe at that $100,000 in interest, but just stick with me on this. I'm going to leave that same 30-year mortgage example on the screen, and we're going to compare all of these other ones to it. If you say, I'm going to go ahead and do that 15-year mortgage, people are saying, they say you save a lot of money doing that. And they're right. You do. On the front end, you save a lot of money. That 15-year mortgage at 2.5% will have you at a payment of $1,333 a month for $240,000 total cost for that mortgage, and with $40,000 of that being interest. The difference between those two mortgages, as far as monthly payments go, are $490. And this is where things start to get interesting, because if you can afford that $1,333 payment, and you're saying, we can go with this, what if you would go ahead and take that 30-year mortgage and invest that difference in, again, a index fund or some other fund that returns at least 10%, or some other investment, but the market typically returns 10%, so I usually just go with a total market index fund. If you would invest that $490 for the entire term of the 30-year mortgage, you would have approximately $1.06 million after 30 years in that investment account. So now when you take your 15-year mortgage and you've paid it for the 15 years, your home is paid off, and you just go ahead and invest that $1,333 per month into that same fund for the additional 15 years to make the 30-year term, you would end up with about $560,000 in that investment account. That difference right there is approximately $500,000 by having that $490 invested over 30 years versus the $1,333 over 15 years. Now, we do have to take into account the difference in the interest amount that was paid, which is about $60,000. So even with that $60,000 subtracted from our total difference, you're looking at approximately $440,000 to the better by taking that 30-year mortgage and investing the difference from your 15-year mortgage payment over that 30 years. At the end of the day, you still have your same $200,000 home that I'm sure has appreciated in value over those 30 years, but just the amount that you have invested with the 30-year mortgage versus the 15-year mortgage makes the 30-year mortgage the clear winner when it comes to your financial situation at the end of that 30-year period. Now that is a pretty solid example of why the 30-year mortgage is by far the best mortgage product if you are able to invest that money and be disciplined and do that. But now let's take a look at a 10-year mortgage, because if you take a 10-year mortgage, once it's paid off, you'll have 10 or 20 years to invest that amount of money. And let's see how that works out with the against the 30-year mortgage. So our 30-year mortgage numbers are still going to be exactly the same. 30 years, 3% interest, $843 a month, $300,000 total, with $100,000 of that being interest that you pay for that mortgage. The 10-year mortgage, we are using a 2.25% interest rate. The total payment is $1,862 a month. You're going to make $223,000 in total payments, with $23,500 of that being interest. So, big time good for people who are the debt-free type of folks, the Dave Ramsey's out there. You're getting this paid off as soon as possible. You're paying the least amount for the loan, and everything is good, except when you compare it to the 30-year mortgage with investing the difference over time. The difference in these payments is $1,019 a month. And if you start investing that right away with that 30-year mortgage, you end up with $2.2 million in that investment account at the end of 30 years. If you just take your $1,862 that you were paying on that 10-year mortgage, after it's paid off, invested that for the remaining 20 years to make 30 altogether, you end up with $1.4 million in that account. That is an $800,000 difference. And when you take a look, it's about $75,000 difference in interest costs. You're looking at a net gain of $725,000 by taking that 30-year note and investing the difference between that 10-year note over the entire 30 years, minus the interest amount. You end up with $750,000 almost to the black. The 30-year mortgage in this case is significantly better in the end financially than the 15-year or the 10-year mortgage. There are also a couple more interesting advantages to the 30-year mortgage. The biggest one for me is the safety factor on the 30-year mortgage. If you run into a problem at any time in that 30 years, you lose your job. I mean, we're just coming out of this pandemic, and we're not even out of it, but the vaccines are starting to be produced and stuff. But if you would happen to lose your job, if you have that 15 or 10-year mortgage, you are locked into that much higher payment. If you have that 30-year mortgage and you are just investing the difference, all you have to do is stop investing that difference, and you have drastically reduced your amount that you have to put out every month. That is a bit of a safety net, and that could be health problems. It could be that you have to buy a new car, or just anything unexpected that comes down the pike. That 30-year mortgage is going to have a much lower payment that you can, use that other money, and you're not required. Because nothing would be worse than if you got about 14 years into a 15-year mortgage, all of a sudden you couldn't make that $1,333 payment, and you got the home foreclosed on, and you lost all of that equity and all of that interest, and it's gone because they have foreclosed and taken your home. In addition, inflation will reduce the value of this debt over time. The reason for that is that the dollars in the future will be worth less than the dollars today that you're taking on this note. So you will still be paying the same amount of dollars for these things, but the dollars that you're using will be worth less in the future. Inflation is about 3% or so annually. At the end of that 10-year note, the value of the debt that you're paying off will only be worth about 70% of what it was when you took the loan. For the 15-year, it'll be about 55%. But for that 30-year note, the value of that debt at the end of the term will only be worth about 10% of what it was when you first took it on. So when you're looking at these things, you can say that even though the 10 or the 15 might be cheaper on the front end, you will actually reduce the amount that you pay via inflation because it will make that debt less valuable over time. And there's one more thing that really gets me when you talk about paying off your home or your mortgage or whatever, and this is almost exclusive to homes, maybe vehicles and such as well, but that you never pay off that property and never have to pay a dime on it again. Taxes will always get you. The government always wants their piece of the pie. And so you're always going to have some sort of payment, whether it be monthly or once a year or twice a year or whatever, that the tax man comes looking for their payment. So I've always thought that it's kind of silly to sit there and think, I'm going to pay off my home, because you're always going to have to pay something. And then that discounts things like insurance that most people keep on their home even after it's paid off, maintenance and upkeep, things of that nature that are pretty common with other things, but you will never not be able to pay taxes on your home, or else the government will come and foreclose on it, just as if you hadn't paid your mortgage and the bank would foreclose on it. So that's kind of a sucker punch for paying off your home, and just, kind of stinks altogether. So there you have it, guys. That is why I think that the 30-year mortgage is much better than the 10 or 15-year mortgage or 20-year mortgage, or really anything less than the 30-year mortgage, as long as you invest those differences and leave it in there over time. You'll end up several $100,000 ahead at the end, and you will have that flexibility and security to be able to make lower payments if necessary, and you'll have the forces of inflation working against the debt that you have to pay off over time. All these things, I think, make the 30-year loan the way to go, and that in general you should never take a 15 or 10-year loan unless your only goal is to pay the very least amount in interest and to have your home paid off in the least amount of time possible. I appreciate you guys watching today. If you got some value out of this, if you liked it, be sure to hit the thumbs up button for me. Subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you guys on the next one.